So I have no idea what she just said. I don't know. Maybe it was good or bad. It's fantastic to have this smell, de la Fruze, and to start. And it reminds me that we sometimes use the smells for creating stories with children. That what character could this rosemary be? Maybe a sophisticated character. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking French now. It's a sophisticated Frenchman. I don't know. But using the smells with the imagination as well. So it's a lovely thing to have. It's great to have these flags. I'm really happy that Martina has invited me here and to be the sole representative of the UK. And despite what you hear in the news, many of us feel emotionally, culturally, romantically attached to Europe. So I'm going to hold on to this flag here. So please, thank you. So this is me telling a story to a frog. And you'll understand that the frog had their revenge yesterday. We came to the dinner time. They were talking. All the evening while we're having dinner, the frogs were telling me stories. But this just reminds me to give you some context of who I am and perhaps why I am here. I started professionally life, as an environmental scientist. I studied ecology in farmlands, a lot of work with insects. I did a PhD and some postdoc research in the environment. And then sometimes the professor would say, we have some children and they're coming to the university, what shall we do? And I said, I will talk to them. And I really enjoyed talking to the children. And then I said, why am I doing science? I like talking to children. So I changed jobs and I became an environmental educator. Working in field centres, in wild places more than gardens, but in woodlands and heathland and meadowland, and helping to teach some information about the outdoors. And then I thought to myself, I want to tell them stories. I don't want to be constrained by the truth. And so I started making things up. And so after a few years of being an environmental educator, environmental scientist, then environmental educator, I quit my job and I became a storyteller. And I get paid sometimes wherever I go to tell stories. So that's why I'm here, because she paid me. Not only that, of course. So I think I'll just say a little bit, because the word storytelling, however it is being translated to you now, the word storytelling in English, it's so wide now, because the authors in the books, they say, the greatest storyteller. J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, the greatest storyteller. In films, they say this is storytelling. In the papers, they say, fake news, they're telling stories. But I want to talk about something very, very specifically, the oldest manifestation of storytelling. We could talk about it as simply communicating a narrative to one or more listeners only using voice and gesture. And here, the picture here is giving you an example of one person telling stories to two children. Although it's very simple, and it's the oldest way, perhaps, in which we communicate, there's also something magic that happens. I love this picture, and it'd be interesting to talk to you about what you think is happening, because it's not just the words. There's something that happens when the words come out. I think about storytelling as being a transfer of mental imagery. So the storyteller, he has or she has an image in their head, and then they have to use words. They don't recite the words or read the words or act out the words. They are just improvising the words from the image in their head. And then the other people that are listening, they have to recreate the image in their own head. But the magic is, it's not the same image in my head that goes into your head, because you see things in a different way, and it creates. I like to think of the story is living here. They've even made a space for the story. It's invisible, but here is the space. And the story is alive between the lips of the storyteller and the ears of the story listener. So that is where the magic is happening. So environmental storytelling, let me ask you a question, adding on to de la Fruze's question. Has anybody in your work, are you using storytelling, either yourself telling stories or hiring a storyteller? Is anybody using storytelling? Quite a few. For the rest of you, I will leave my card. I'm available for quite cheap. I don't know. But maybe what I want to do today is to encourage people to use storytelling more. I think it has a valuable role to fit in with other ways of which we're using education in gardens. So what is environmental storytelling? Here's I don't know why I put it in quotes, because I said it myself, but anyway. Telling stories to engage or inspire or educate an audience about the natural world, how it works, why it matters, and how we can make a difference. So really we understand that in environmental storytelling, the context and the content is about the natural world. It's about the environment. And really it's the intention of the storyteller to try and create a closer relationship with the audience, with nature. Not just with the story, but with the nature, which is the subject of the story. And there's lots of things we want to talk about, but two things that I think are really important about storytelling. It should always be in connection with going outside. Ideally, we should have a story where we are telling the story outside. Stories love to be told outside. They can breathe, and they can feel at home, and they can fit in with the place. But the second thing is, and it does really fit in well with what Dilla Fruz has been saying, it's almost as if the organizers had planned to put the two speakers together for a reason. And it's because environmental storytelling, we have a starting place, but we don't know the end of the effects of the story. I think that's really important because we can't always measure everything. We can't put a tick box. Some things we can measure, other things we don't know. But we know that there is something that's happening when you're planting a seed of the story, that story can grow, it can start to have an effect on our emotions, in our minds, in our attitudes, in our behaviors, sometimes many, many, many years after the story has first been heard. There are stories inside me that I heard when I was a child, little seeds of stories that are now big stories, and they affect how I feel. And sometimes we have to remember when we're telling a story, it might be a long time before the fruit of that story is born. I think that for me, that's important. We don't know the eventual outcome of the story. So I want to talk about two things in the short time I have. The first part of the talk is about what are the values and the benefits of stories? Why should we be telling stories, particularly in the context of outdoors in gardens? And the second is to give you just some small examples of where I'm working in the UK, specifically in Dorset, and to give you some pictures and examples of how I'm using storytelling in outdoors in that area. Oh, I'm going to go back. Because the first one I wanted to say is storytelling is fun. It's the very nature of storytelling to slow down. Thank you. It's the very nature of stories to be fun. That's what they're designed to be. They're designed to be entertaining. They're designed to make people feel amused or animated or to feel connected. So the first thing is that stories are fun. And I think once we have this starting point of fun, I think a lot can happen. There is a writer, the book is quite old now, but it's very, very popular and very powerful, called Sharing the Joy of Nature with Children. I think you'll know this. It's an American writer called Joseph Cornell, and you know this. And one of the concepts that he uses is flow learning. You know about that? Flow learning. And he talks about how it's really important to start any program of education with something enthusiastic, with something that creates energy, that creates an interest in the children. And storytelling is a perfect example. If we can create an interest, a buzz, then we can go out and can learn many things. And he says, without enthusiasm, we can't learn anything. So we start with the story and hopefully the enthusiasm, and then with the learning. Secondly, again, we're linking together, a sense of wonder. I like the picture again, because this is a little girl in a little world of her own. She is completely in her own sense of wonder. What I know about working with children is that, especially when they're very young, they are a little bit clumsy, but that's okay. And they completely naturally go into their own worlds, particularly when the environment is rich and is so full of senses, like this woodland environment here. They're in their own world. But also, when they're in their own world, the language that they're speaking is story. When they're talking about what their sense of experience of the natural world is, story. And I've listened to children, maybe eavesdropping, and they're always making stories and telling stories and relating to each other through stories. We have a writer, 40 years old now, but in England, called Edith Cobb, and she talked about sense of wonder as being a time when they are in love with the universe, when the children are still in love with the universe. And also, I'm also going to go even more slowly. I'm sorry for my interpreters. This is a new situation for me. Storytelling is a way of keeping the sense of wonder alive. So if we have a storytelling, we're allowed to value the sense of wonder. We're allowed to give children the opportunity to keep that sense of wonder And it's sad, but it's, I think in my experience, true, that although children have a very strong sense of wonder in the beginning, as they get older, somehow they are losing their sense of wonder. And particularly I know that when we become adulthoods, the sense of wonder is not so valued unless you're very old, in which case the sense of wonder comes back. And it's the same with storytelling. When I'm telling stories to very young children or to very old people, they are brilliant. In the middle, I'm choosing you here. In the middle, not so good. I have to work more hard with you to, this is a story. Forget about your work program tomorrow or your boyfriend or whatever. You think about the story. So it's nice that story can give value to this natural childhood propensity to have a sense of wonder. So thirdly, when we go outside with a story in our head, we start to see the world differently. It's a different way. This is, I know one colleague here, I don't know where she is, works in Cornwall. Here we are. And this is from the Lost Gardens of Helligan. If you go to Cornwall, you should go there. It's a very beautiful garden, an old garden that has been restored. And they use art as well as plants. And I was once telling a story in Cornwall, not in the Lost Garden of Helligan, but the Eden Project. Do you know the Eden Project? A beautiful garden, visitor center like here. And I told a story, a very good story, a very multicultural story, a Chinese story, a Scandinavian story, a British story, about how the world was made from the body of a giant. So his bones became the mountains and the rocks, and his blood was the river, maybe the river Danube, I don't know. And his hair fell down to become the plants, and his breath was the wind, and his brains even became the clouds. It's a good story. And then when I finished telling the story, we went outside, and it was snowing. It was wintertime, and it was snowing. And the children, they looked up and said, "Look, it's the giant's dandruff." I don't know how that translates, the dandruff, but it's the little pieces from his hair. So if you tell a story, then when you go out into the world, you're looking for the story. The story is everywhere. I do this myself. I hear a story. I've seen the story. I can make the pieces of the story come alive. But also, because we've been listening to stories and our imagination is alive, we can make up new stories. I told a story once about a dragon. I tell many stories about dragons. And after I finished telling the story and I was feeling, and then there was one girl, she jumped up and she said, I know exactly where the dragon lives. And we went to the place, and it was true. There was a cave, and it was surrounded by trees, and it was exactly the place where a dragon could live, maybe does live. And we spent the rest of the day sitting around talking about the dragon, making some more stories about dragons. So here is a little quote from a boy. And he told me this in confidence, but I don't tell him. I'm going to repeat it. Some people say nature is boring, but it's not boring because I can see dragons in the trees. So I have been walking. I gave the organizers a little bit of a fright this morning because I went for a walk in the garden just before I was supposed to be here on stage. And I could see garden dragons out there as well. So it's an amazing ability to kind of use a combination of observation and imagination. And do you know what? Storytelling and science has the same beginning. A scientist should be using observation and a sense of wonder. And the same with the storyteller. He's using observation with a sense of wonder. And then the scientist might make hypotheses and theories, and the storyteller will make stories. But it's the same starting point, having that wide eyes and then looking as hard as you can and seeing all sorts of things. Sense of place. It's almost as if we're working together. I believe that if you tell stories, the stories then live in that place. The audience who have heard the story, they go back to that place and they remember the story. I do this myself. I go back, remember the story we told there. This is called the Story Tree. It's a place in England where I started going with children to tell them stories. After a few times, they started to tell themselves stories, and now I don't go to the Story Tree, but the children still go to the Story Tree because they know it's a place in the landscape where stories can be told. The other thing about sense of place I love is that the environment, the place, is also telling the story. So here I'm telling a story, and suddenly there was a and so I'm telling the story about, the birds making a garden, and then the crow came. And so the crow is part of the story. We have to use whatever else is going on. And also I want to say about language. We can use a lot of sophisticated language with children in a story because they know the context. If you just use a word on its own, it's hard to understand. But if it's in a story, there is all the context of the story so they can understand it from that point. And this is more towards the logical side of the value of stories, but actually we can use it to remember things. I have a colleague who is a storyteller and also a lecturer in natural history, in ecology and environmental science. And he did an experiment with his class. He taught them about the life cycle of the salmon. And he did split the class into two halves. And one half, he just told them the facts of the eggs and the small fry, and they're growing and they're going in the rivers to breeding, coming out again. And the second one, he told a story. There was once a little fish that was born, and his name was Sam. And Sam, he went on a journey, and he found many things, and he had to survive attack by different predators, and he swam, and he could smell his home, and he swam back up to the river where he came, where he was eaten by a bear. I don't think that was the end of the story, but the point was he told the information in two ways, and the class that learnt just from the facts, their memory was much smaller than the class who had learned by having a holistic story and an emotional story and something to connect with. So there was ways in which stories are memorable. Just a way of finishing that first part. This is a quote. If you want your children to be brilliant, tell them fairy tales. If you want them to be even more brilliant, tell them even more fairy tales. Do you know who said that? Not me this time. So that was Einstein. So I'm a fan of Einstein. Okay, so I'm working in Dorset. It's an area on the south coast of England. It's very beautiful. It has a long coastline. We call it the Jurassic coastline because there are many, many fossils there. It's also a beautiful place for the landscape. We grow a lot of apple trees there. We drink cider. We have Dorset apple cake, which is almost as good as Austrian Apfelstrudel. I'm not sure whether you agree, but this is my feeling. So here we are in Dorset. And this map is showing you some places that are called areas of outstanding natural beauty. So maybe you are familiar with the idea of a national park. But this is an area which is also conserved because of its beauty and because of the ecology and the wildlife and the history. It's a little bit less money, unfortunately, but it's also protected. So the one I'm talking about is the Dorset area of natural beauty, and it's over here. And here, De La Fru's, here is Portland. This is the original Portland, the Isle of Portland. I'm saying original, I don't know. So my job is to work with 8 schools, and there are some stories, folk tales, myths that still exist that have been passed down from generations in Dorset. But many of them are either lost or forgotten. So my job has been to work with schools, 8 different schools, and to go out. Firstly, I tell them stories because that's opening the flow of imagination. And then we go to a place and we see if we can make up a new myth, a brand new ancient myth. So here we are, we're going out, and this place is called the Valley of the Stones. And so here we were talking about the Ice Age was creating a valley where they pushed the stones and now is covered in rocks and rubble and big stones. But I know, and now I'm telling you, that this is created by 2 giants. And the names of the giants were Frost and Thor. And Frost and Thor, they had a great battle. So these children are now working out, why were the giants fighting? How did they fight? Who was the winner? What happened to the loser? The whole story is being created. And we're using these landscape starting points. We're using geography, like here. We're using geology, archaeology, history, ecology, and of course, any evidence we have of mythology, like the giants. This is a Bronze Age barrow. It's 4,500 years old. The Dorset landscape is very famous for Bronze Age. There's more Bronze Age barrows in Dorset than anywhere else in the world. I'm not bragging, but it's just true. So we can take children here. The farmer has allowed us to take children into a 4,500-year-old barrow, burial ground, And they're going in here. We use blindfolds again to try and get them to think about what is the warrior that was here, and how are they feeling, and what story could come out. Is there a good feeling or an evil feeling? Or maybe it's a doorway, a portal to another world. We use this thing, I call it story archaeology. So we're trying to put together a story by finding things. So we go and we pick up stones, we pick up feathers, we pick up pieces of leaf, we pick up earth, and we decide together in a group how we can make a story from those 4 or 5 things. We are also working with artists. So this is a landscape artist. Dorset is also famous for chalk figures. From hundreds of years ago, people made big chalk figures. There is one very famous one of a very rude giant. I should have brought a picture of that one, but I'll find one later. But this is an artist who created a new one, and it's of a white hare. So I was telling a folk tale about an old woman, and she could turn herself into a hare, and she went across the fields. But one day the hunters, they attacked the hare, and then she limped home. And when they got back to the village, there was an old woman who lived in the village, and she was bleeding because she had realized she had been turned from a hare. So we are asking the children to create their own stories of shape shifting. So how an animal can turn into a human, what will be the story? We can use names as well as a starting point for story. So this butterfly, I don't really have in Austria, but probably. But in England, it's called the Adonis blue. And you know Adonis is the name of a very beautiful god. So we were thinking, why is this butterfly called the Adonis blue? And we made a story that Adonis, it's a long story, but at the end of the story, when Adonis is killed, rather than just dying, the goddess Athena, she turned him into a cloud of blue butterflies, the same color as his eyes, and they flew across the landscape and all the way to Dorset. So we have them here. And this name, the common English name is bluebells. I'm sure you have them here. I think you have them in the garden here. The common name is bluebells. In Dorset, we call them Grandfather Griggles. And nobody knows why. And so now we are making up a reason why. We're asking the children to come up with a story. Why is it called Grandfather Griggles? So getting them to start with a name and to come up with a story afterwards. I love trees. And stories about trees. So here's 2 ways in which we're working with children to tell stories about trees. First of all, the trees have scars. I also have scars, maybe you, but the trees have scars, and we can look at the scars. What happened to the tree? What is the story of this tree? So these children are looking at scars, and then we are also listening to a tree. We have to use what is called our imagineers. Our ears and our imagination is working together. And the tree, if we listen slowly like a sit spot, we listen. And we can hear the stories of that tree and what it's seeing, what it's remembering, what it wants to tell us. Okay, another project is more connected with gardens, is called Seasonal Schools. It's a brand new project. We're just looking to extend the work. We're working with 20 schools in the region of Dorset. And the idea is, how can we make sure that the schools, the state schools in the area, are making use of the changing seasons throughout the year, so that they're using the inspiration and the physical resources to bring it into their curriculum. So here is our aim. Our aim is to encourage and to support schools to become more aware of and make greater use of the changing seasons as a source of inspiration and resources and opportunities, especially for creative learning and artistic expression. Because it's the same reason. We want them to have a starting point, but no fixed end point. We want them to be as expressive. And also recognizing that so many of the artistic geniuses in our own cultures, from Mozart to Monet, are using the seasons as their inspiration to make music and to make art. So we want the children to feel the same sense of inspiration from the seasons. Of course, the first thing we must do is go outside, and we do a lot. We go outside into the garden of the school, where the playgrounds in most of the towns and cities and villages have quite good gardens in England. So we go into the garden, or we can take them into the woodlands and find some places to go there. And we're going again and again and again. It is important. We go in the summer and the spring and the autumn and the winter. We go all around the seasons and see how they're changing their feelings and their senses and their inspiration. And then we're gathering. So we're gathering things. We're gathering smells. like earlier, we're gathering pictures. So these are just like nature notes. So whatever the child wants to make a document of, they can write it. What is that noise? And the next stage is then to make a map. So this is a map. We call it a story map because it's making a map based on your journey. You go out into the garden and you travel around and you have a journey. When you come back, you make a map. But then when you make a map, you can use your imagination. So the first thing is to give names. And so it could be the old wishing tree, or it could be the pixie pond. I don't know how pixie is translating. Little fairy pond. It could be the river of doom. Or the river of love, depends on how you're feeling. So all these places that we are meeting outside and then coming back to draw pictures, they are all given imaginative names. And then we can make a story. We can take a character on a journey through the map, and there is a new story. This is one map. We use also the materials from the outdoors. This one, I think, is much better from my point of view. Here is a map. I like that she's not even staying on the paper. The whole table is the map. But it's a walk in the woods, and this is a map that they're made, and they are creating a story from their walk in the woods. We might stay in the woods or in the garden and make a miniature world, create a village and little houses, and then from there we make a people with their own culture, and then we can tell the stories of the little people that lived in the little houses, in the little world, in the little garden. We might want to make art from the story that we've heard. If we hear a dragon story, we can make a picture of the dragon. Or on the right-hand side, this is a trail to the dragon's lair, the dwelling place of the dragon, and we must give him a gift. Luckily, he's a vegetarian dragon, so he likes apples. And then we give him a candle because maybe his breath has gone cold and needs some more fire. But we are trying to, ask the children to respond to the dragon story through art. And these characters, I do this a lot, making characters out of clay and also natural resources. And I call them spirits of place. Even we could give them a Latin word, genius loci. But really they are beings that live only in the place where they are made. And if you find me in the marketplace later on, we'll be making some spirits of place. We have some good Austrian clay, and we have the outdoors, and we can make a spirit. But it's allowing the children to say, what is the character, what is the being, what is the spirit that lives in this place, and then to be able to tell their story. That went too fast. So also the aim of the project is to work with teachers so that they will go back into their schools, and they will also be using the seasons and using creative work. And so this is a training program I'm working on with children, with teachers, where they are watching the leaves falling from the trees in autumn. It's quite a long training program. They have to wait for the leaves to fall. But also, when they're looking up and they're having time, this is a lying down spot, not a sitting spot. They are imagining what story is happening in the tree, in the branches of the trees, or they can make up a story of why do the leaves fall in autumn? It's a myth. Why are the leaves falling in autumn? Maybe a giant was shaking the trees, or maybe the trees, they fall their leaves so that the insects can have somewhere to stay and be warm. There's different ways you can find a story. And the last thing, I'm also working in my own community. I live in a town called Bridport, and we have an orchard. It's a community orchard. It wasn't either built by birds like your city farm, but it's a very valuable garden. You can see the aerial view, and it's used by people all the time. It's open access. Anybody can come in. But what we wanted to do was, how do we create intergenerational, so every part of the community, children, older people, and the middle people here, you as well, all together to be in this space, to value this space, to use this space, to be creative with this space. And so what we are doing is creating and demonstrating seasonal celebrations throughout all the year. Sometimes old celebrations and sometimes new celebrations. So this is quite an old celebration of the May time. I think you have maypoles in Austria as well, but apparently not in Spain. Not yet, anyway. But so we go out in the time of the blossoms. This is one of my friends making use of the flowers for his face. And then in the autumn time, this is quite a new celebration. They are apple pigs on the top right-hand side. We are making a celebration called Apple Day. For about 25 years, there's an organization called Common Ground, and we started a brand new celebration, and now the whole of the UK is having Apple Days in the same day, 21st of October. And it's time to bring the harvest of the apples together, to say thank you for the trees, for the harvest, to share recipes about how you make your strudel or your Dorset apple cake, to sing songs about the apples. We have an orchard song as well. Maybe we can have a swap between the City Farm song and the orchard song. What do you reckon? A nice duet? No, I don't know. But then this one is a really old celebration, which I love. And it has its roots in our shared Germanic. It's the last slide. In our shared Germanic ancestry. It's called a wassail. I know Martina knows about it. Has anybody heard of a wassail? I think it might be a peculiar British celebration. It comes, though, from Old Norse or Old Germanic words called wes hael, which means be healthy. And we use this word, wes hael, to go to the orchard when the trees are cold and the weather is cold and their branches are bare, and to give them good health, to wish them good health. And because we're wishing the trees good health,